We have the people who can answer every question about this story as it stands now and as it is developing at this hour. We're joined by Manuel Roig Franzia, who has been in the awkward position of covering this story for the Washington Post, which is owned by Jeff Bezos. And also, Tim O'Brien is with us. He's the executive editor of Bloomberg Opinion. He has written a book about Donald Trump, studied Donald Trump's relationship to David Pecker, who runs the National Enquirer. And Joyce Vance is here to cover the legal points for us. She's a former federal prosecutor and an MSNBC legal contributor. And we're joined by Jerry George, who spent 28 years at the National Enquirer, including as the Los Angeles bureau chief. And Jerry George, let me start with you. Has David Pecker ever been up against anyone like Jeff Bezos before?
No, I think for the first time, David Pecker has met his match. We have finally gone through the looking glass, and we are way beyond yellow journalism. We are now in the area of the RICO Act. This is extortion.
Yeah, Joyce Vance, let me go straight to you on the legal points here, because there is so much in here. Jeff Bezos is very clearly saying this is extortion, this is blackmail. I read that email from a lawyer in New York to Marty Singer in Los Angeles, and I've never seen an email quite like that from lawyer to lawyer.
It really looks like our common understanding of what blackmail is, this kind of a threat. At federal law, there's a family of crimes under this umbrella of extortion and blackmail. But what they consist of, sort of their core, is this notion that AMI would have to try to threaten, in this case, Mr. Bezos, into giving up some property in exchange for AMI not doing damage to his reputation by releasing these photos. The legal fight is over whether what Bezos is being asked to give up is actually property, as the law defines it. But there could well be other crimes here. There could be hacking. There could be receiving stolen property, other crimes we don't yet know enough to perceive here. It really looks, I think, as everyone agrees, as though there's something here that's not right. And
there's two other jurisdictions involved here. There's New York State law that could have been violated by that lawyer. New York State bar procedures could have been violated. He could risk disbarment in New York State for this. And then there's California criminal liability that can be slightly different from New York's, Joyce. So there's plenty of things to study here legally.
That's right. There's federal law, there's state law, there are ethical obligations for lawyers. There is a lot that I think we'll be looking at over the next few days and weeks.
Manuel, no one's been covering this story more thoroughly than you have at the Washington Post, and I just want to ask you at the top, what has Jeff Bezos had to say about your coverage of him, the owner of your newspaper?
We have no idea. We haven't spoken with Jeff Bezos, and he hasn't been involved at all in our reporting, but we have spoken extensively with his security consultant, and he's provided us with some very interesting insights into the backstages of this whole drama, including the investigation that has taken place, in which they have begun to believe, the Bezos camp, that this publication by the National Enquirer might have been politically motivated. I would just add one other thing. You mentioned hacking at the top of the show. Gavin de Becker told us that he does not believe that Jeff Bezos's phone was hacked. He thinks it's possible that a government entity might have gotten hold of his text messages.
And Jerry George, let me just go back to you, because as the Los Angeles bureau chief, I'm sure you know of Gavin de Becker, as I do. You may know him, as I do. He is the person who people in Los Angeles turn to for security, for their own personal protection. He has a very large firm. He provides all sorts of services. He's been doing this for a long time. There's no one I'm aware of in the country, in the private sector, with more experience and resources in knowing how to handle an investigation like this.
Well, Gavin has had the reputation of being the best in the business for the past 25 years. So his involvement alone bespeaks a major concern.
Yeah, and Tim O'Brien, you've been studying Donald Trump's relationship to David Pecker, who runs National Enquirer. The idea that they were trying to, in effect, as Jeff Bezos says, extort out of him a statement that the National Enquirer does not have a political agenda.
Right.
I mean, there's no one who could possibly sign their name to that statement. It is the most corrupt publication in America.
You know, two things I think worth pointing out here. Jeff Bezos, the National Enquirer already published a piece about Jeff Bezos and his extramarital affair, which relied on stolen personal property.
Yes.
Whether it was a federal agency that intercepted it or it was a hacker, information was stolen and put to use. Jeff Bezos launched an investigation to find out what happened. Then the National Enquirer says to him, "We are going to use more stolen information to prevent you from continuing an investigation of how we used previously stolen information to embarrass you." The second thing going on here is, of course, there's politics at work here. David Pecker has a long-standing relationship with Donald Trump. The National Enquirer has reportedly buried years of different stories about Donald Trump that contained embarrassing information about him. We know more recently, obviously, that Pecker was involved with Trump's attorney, Michael Cohen, to bury stories about Trump's relationships and sexual liaisons with Stormy Daniels and another woman. Pecker is cooperating with the federal government in that investigation. He weaponized, prior to that, the National Enquirer's coverage in aid of Donald Trump's candidacy. That in and of itself is political. So when they say to Jeff Bezos, it's time to stop looking into this, and it's also time for you to say there aren't politics involved, they know on the face that both of those things are false fronts. And Bezos has the resources and the temerity to say, no, we're not going to do this.
And Jeff Bezos is, by Donald Trump, a declared enemy of Donald Trump. So there is always a political agenda with the Enquirer.
Not just Bezos, but the Washington Post and Amazon.
The entire newspaper, yeah. And Manuel, to go back to the Washington Post coverage of this, and Jeff Bezos makes the point tonight in his statement that there's a Saudi connection to this story. He says the Post's essential and unrelated coverage of the murder of its columnist Jamal Khashoggi is undoubtedly unpopular in certain circles. There is also some reporting indicating that the National Enquirer, the company, has been trying to obtain Saudi financing, and so that they have an interest in making life difficult for Jeff Bezos and hoping they can possibly also influence Saudi coverage in the Washington Post.
Well, it's quite plain from looking at Jeff Bezos' letter that he published tonight that he's interested in what would be described as the Saudi angle. Whether that ends up developing and becoming a major part of the story, I think it remains to be seen. But at this point, it's still in the formative stages as far as this trajectory of this scandal.
Jerry George, knowing David Pecker, knowing the company the way they operate, they're in need of money, they're in need of financing, they're looking for Saudi financing. What would they be willing to do to try to help the Saudis in terms of their coverage in, say, the Washington Post?
Well, I've mentioned earlier that the special issue that they put out in the spring, touting Saudi as the new Magic Kingdom, was suspicious in itself, in that 3 months later they acquired enough money to procure their biggest competitor. But I might add that, as much as the world knows Bezos as the world's richest man and the founder of Amazon and the owner of the Washington Post, to Enquirer readers, Jeff Bezos isn't really a name. Jeff Bezos doesn't really warrant the kind of cover that the Enquirer gave him. They splashed a story on this marital affair, and I doubt if 10% of Enquirer readers even know who he is. So, I mean, I think that was suspicious in itself.
Manuel, where does the story go from here?
I think we'll keep digging. We'll approach it like we do every other story. We'll ask everybody questions, and we'll find out every piece of information that we can. As they say, we'll turn every page, every single page.
Manuel, Roy Franzia, Jerry George, Tim O'Brien, Joyce Vance, thank you all for joining us.